Hutchinson. I am the author of the Mighty Muskrat Mystery Series. This is my second book, The Case of the Missing Auntie, which I'll be reading from later. My first book, The Case of Windy Lake, came out in the spring of 2019, and it takes place on the fictional First Nation of Windy Lake. Now, the Mighty Muskrats are four kids around the ages of 10 and 12, and the books are aimed at students from the ages of 7 to, say, about 14. Now, the Mighty Muskrats are four cousins. A Tim, who is the physical sort of brawn of the group. We have Samuel and Chickadee, who sort of share the leadership position, and they sort of represent intellect and emotional and switch back and forth between that. And then we have Otter, and Otter is the sort of the spiritual member of the group. Otter's parents passed away when he was a young boy, and he was raised by their grandparents, so he is well trained in bushcraft and the teachings of Cree people. And so he's sort of the spiritual, quiet one of the group. The Mighty Muskrats have earned their nickname because they've hung out together in First Nation families. You know, kids of a certain age group are often put together, and they may be cousins, but they're almost like brothers and sisters in that they're put together, and as they grow older, they stay within those age groups. So that's what's happening to the Mighty Muskrats. They're cousins, and Tim and Samuel are brothers, but they solve mysteries on their little First Nation. Now, each book comes with a secondary story. There is the main mystery arc, but then each story comes with a secondary story, and so that deals with the idea of First Nations and different ways of First Nation thought. Each book has a secondary story that deals with two different poles of First Nation thinking. And the idea is that I wanted to teach kids that not all First Nation people think alike, and that when something happens, you know, there are people on different sides, First Nation people on different sides, who think of things in different ways. So in the case of Windy Lake, this takes place on the reserve, fictional First Nation, and near the reserve there's a mine which is having an environmental impact on the local traditional territory of the people. And so the Mighty Muskrats have a cousin named Denise, and she begins a protest over the mine's impacts on the environment. On the other hand, they meet a young man who is working at the mine, a young First Nation man who's working at the mine and trying to make a better life for his family by working at the mine. And so you experience those two poles of First Nation thought. In the case of the missing auntie, the kids go to the city, and I'll be reading a little bit about that in just a minute. But the two poles of this book are, they meet a young First Nation man, their cousin, who is very successful in the urban environment, and he's doing well. And then they meet a young First Nation man who's not doing so well, who is in a poor neighborhood and is having struggles maintaining his freedom in the city from those around him. I wrote these books because, as somebody who has been both a journalist and a communications professional working for First Nation organizations, I have a lot of conversations with Canadians and First Nations about how First Nation people think on various subjects, as well as First Nation history. And so I wrote these books to reach a younger audience and explain to them that First Nation people don't always think alike, and that there's a history there, that a real history that impacts people's hearts and minds and their concept of the future and themselves, and that is always a part of these books. Now, Windy Lake is a sort of a mixture of my reserve and the farm my parents moved to in southern Manitoba when I was, a pre-teenager myself. We were not a very wealthy family. There were 7 kids in our family, and so I'm not certain if that had anything to do with it, but it might have. And for me, I started writing because my dad hated TV and sometimes would remove the TV for whole seasons, and so we read a lot. And one of my favorite book series was the Hardy Boy books, as well as Alfred Hitchcock and the Three Investigators. Now, looking at the Hardy Boys, they were much well off than I was. They both had dirt bikes. They lived in a nice big house and had a lot of things that we just didn't enjoy in my family. And so I wanted to write a series of books that kids in my position, First Nation kids, other kids, could relate to. And so that is another reason why I wrote the Mighty Muskrats Mystery Series. Um, yeah, we'll just get right into it. So, chapter 1 of The Case of the Missing Auntie. Uh, it's called A Sister Stolen. Grandpa hasn't seen his little sister since she was taken. As she looked out the back window of the van, Chickadee grappled with the concept of forcefully being pulled from her family. She was also grappling with an idea that was slowly taking shape in her mind. The Mighty Muskrats were on their way to the city. That morning they had piled into Aunt Maud's vehicle and had spent the past 6 hours counting license plates, watching for animals, both wild and farmed, and stopping at gas stations to pee and then refuel with chips and pop. Taken? Grandpa's little sister? What do you mean? A Tim seated in the middle flicked his long hair out of his eyes and scratched his belly. Samuel had the other window, but his nose was buried in a book. Otter was riding shotgun and talking with his aunt. Auntie Maud looked in the rearview mirror at her niece. Chickadee's long black hair hung over her shoulders. She was wearing her favorite black hoodie and looked back at her auntie in the mirror with bright, empathetic eyes. Grandpa told you about his missing sister? Auntie Maud gave her a quizzical look. Chickadee nodded. Otter pulled his feet off the dashboard and turned his skinny frame to see his cousin better. His cropped black hair, button nose, and cute face made him look younger than his 11 years. Auntie Maud was impressed with Grandpa's trust in her niece. He doesn't talk about that much. I only learned about it from Uncle Levi. Chickadee responded to her aunt's reflection. I asked him what he wanted from the city, and he said all he wanted to know was where they put his baby sister. He said this winter she had called to him in a dream, and then he told me what happened long ago. Short version, I think. Auntie Maud nodded. It's a sad story. Your great-grandpa died in an accident at work. Your grandpa was just a teenager. Great-grandma Doris tried hard to provide for the family. She worked hard. Young grandpa did too. But one day, when Doris came home from work, the police and the government workers were taking her children away. Your grandpa too. They said they were too many kids, and they were too poor. But Grandpa has brothers and sisters. The largest and most muscled of the muskrats, a Tim, shook his big head slightly, and the fringe of hair over his eyes danced. His mother looked at him in the mirror. Yeah, but the older kids got sent to residential school. Eventually they came back. Grandpa's youngest sister never did. She was scooped. Otter gave his aunt a quizzical look. Scooped? Yeah, started back in the 1950s. Lasted until the 80s. The government took thousands of First Nation kids and put them up for adoption or fostering, often without the permission or knowledge of their families. Many of them were sent to other provinces or down to the States or to faraway countries like New Zealand. Auntie Maud shook her head sadly. She looked at her sons in the rearview mirror. I just couldn't imagine someone taking you away from me. What would that do to my heart? It would be broken. So there were residential schools and scoops? Otter winced. His parents had been taken away from him by a car accident when he was young. Otter knew the pain of losing his mother and father. Yeah, some say that when the residential schools got a bad reputation and were being shut down, the government's next assimilation tactic was the scoops. There were TV and magazine advertisements about First Nation kids for adoption. Isn't that crazy? Auntie Maud's voice was incredulous. So that's what happened to Great Auntie Charlotte? Chickadee's voice was filled with disappointment. That's her name? Auntie Maud was impressed again. Chickadee nodded. Wow, Grandpa must really trust you. Even Levi didn't know that. Charlotte. She caught her niece's eye in the mirror. I have a great Auntie Charlotte, Otter beamed, but then frowned. Out there. Somewhere. I had a friend who was scooped. Aunt Maud's lips tightened as she told the story. He was a good guy, but confused, you know. He grew up brown in a white family in a white town. Said he never fit in. When he came back home, he didn't fit there either. He didn't know how to be an Indian. Aunt Maud scoffed sadly and looked at Otter. The poor guy never had a home. Imagine if your little sister was suddenly gone. Chickadee's voice was filled with sadness at the thought. You didn't even know if she was being hurt by a stranger. No way of finding out if she was okay, if she was with good people. Tim's mother cringed as she drove. Grandpa usually has a reason for telling people things. Maybe this should be the next mission for us mighty muskrats, Chickadee ventured. The exhibition fair is our mission, a Tim squealed with delight. It's the best week in the city. We've got money from Dad and Grandpa, so we have cash to spend. Samuel spoke up over the rim of his book and the sound of the band. Chickadee was still thinking of her Auntie Charlotte, but an excited Tim hugged her so tightly he squeezed the thought away. You guys have never been to the X, Tim beamed. There's the cyclone, it spins you in a circle, and then there's the rattler that kind of spins you in a circle while waving you up in the air like this. Tim's long arm swung back and forth from his elbow. Never mind the exhibition. They've never been to the city. Ever. Samuel chuckled at his older brother. Tim punched him in the leg. The two boys began to wrestle, rough but playful. Chickadee and Otter looked at each other and shrugged. It was true. They were almost teenagers, but had never been to the city. Now they were on their way. The thought filled them both with excitement and fear. On one hand, there were the many stories of city-based adventures told by Tim and Sam and their older cousins. On the other hand, were all the horrors and crimes and all the young adult movies and TV shows that were pumped out to the remoteness of Windy Lake. Stop it! Tim and Sam's mother's voice boomed in the confines of the band. The brothers quickly switched from roughhousing to half-heartedly slapping at each other and being careful not to draw their mother's attention. Tim and Samuel's parents hoped to have some time alone in the small northern town that their father flew out of to go to work. She was dropping them all off at her sister's house to spend the week. Wavoka's Whale is playing in the city, Otter said quietly to the windshield. Samuel and Tim were suddenly interested. The Whale? That's cool. I love their music. Tim slapped Otter on the shoulder. I'd go to that. Is it free? Samuel shut his book. Otter shook his head. I really want to go. They're my favorite band, but they're too big to ever come to the res. Lolly Leach is my favorite guitarist. I have my exhibition money, and then the money I got from working with Uncle Jacob. I was going to ask Harold to take me. He'd be fun to go with, Auntie Maud smiled at her nephew. Harold was an older cousin who had lived in the city for years. Well, I've seen Wavoka's Whale before, Samuel shrugged. Me too, Tim nodded. So, secondary mission. Samuel smacked his book against his palm. Get Otter to Wavoka's Whale. Agreed? The boys all nodded in unison. Chickadee held up a finger. What about Auntie Charlotte? There's probably people we could ask about her in the city. Okay, Samuel pinched his chin. Tertiary mission. Look for Auntie Charlotte. Shouldn't that be our first mission? Chickadee wondered aloud. We came to the city to go to the X. That's why we got the money, Tim said. Remember? Sounds like you're all going to be busy, Auntie Maud chuckled. Samuel suddenly pushed his slim upper body past his brother and then between the front seats to get a better view out the windshield. We're almost there. This little town is just outside the perimeter highway that skirts the city. We should be able to see the buildings soon. Put your seatbelt back on, Sam. His mother used her elbow to push him back. We'll see buildings soon, Samuel continued to scan the skyline from his seat. We'll see them when we get past those trees and on that corner, Tim pointed up the highway. Otter and Chickadee both breathed deeply as the excitement built within them. Chickadee wanted to fly out of the van and stand on the corner up ahead. Otter's foot maintained a steady tap against the floor. The highway rolled on. The trees they were passing were different from what they were used to at home. Mile after mile of leafy trees spread their green arms and defined field after field of growing crops. The rocks didn't stick out of the earth here. The earth was a fertile black, not the sterile white mud of the res. Chickadee looked at the bottom of her pant legs. Sure enough, pale limestone dust from the Windy Lake First Nation shaded the hem of her jeans. There, see? Samuel pointed off into the distance. The trees had cleared, and the car was now headed towards a long stretch of fields. Chickadee saw nothing that looked like a city to her. Where is it? Otter was also confused. Tim leaned forward from his seat in the middle and pointed out some black rectangles in the far distance. There, see? Those things that look like little black pipes sticking up. Otter squinted. Really? But they're so small, and there's only a few of them. Auntie Maud guffawed. We ain't going to New York, sunshine. She gave the steering wheel a slap as she laughed. Not every city makes the movies, and we're still 20 clicks out. Otter sat back in his seat and watched the city approach. Chickadee sighed. She was a bit disappointed. She reminded herself not to have too many expectations. Samuel leaned over his older brother and touched her arm. Don't worry, it gets bigger and better. Tim gave her a nudge. We'll take care of you. Chickadee smiled and shrugged. It concerned her more that Tim felt the need to take care of her in the city. She looked back out the window. The city was a little nearer now. It looked like a handful of children's building blocks clustered on the horizon. Chickadee remembered a documentary on the pyramids in Egypt Asia, and South America. Mankind's first buildings were piles of big blocks. She was looking forward to seeing the pyramids' great-great-great-grandchildren up close. So that's the first chapter of The Case of the Missing Auntie. I think it's a great book, and the Mighty Muskrats have many adventures in the city. They meet some bullies and some people who save them, and some people who inspire them. And I hope you will take a chance to buy the book and share it with the young people in your life. Of course, the first one is The Case of the Missing or The Case of Windy Lake, and the third book, The Case of the Burgle Bundle, will be out in the spring of 2021. And The Case of the Burgle Bundle deals with a memory bundle, a treaty memory bundle that goes missing. And the Mighty Muskrats are on the case, and they track it down. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I'm Michael Hutchinson. Have a good one. Stay smiling.